Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Choi with the Food Institute, and welcome to DMA's webinar 2021 Trends for Chain Operators and Distributors. We're pleased to be joined today by Wade Hansen, a principal at Technomic. Wade has more than 25 years of experience in strategic planning, market sizing, market trend evaluation, category opportunity assessments, and company benchmarking, and has led Technomic's supermarket food service practice since 2006. Wade has done extensive work in the bakery category and has spent considerable time advising the industry on the future of sustainability in food service. We also welcome Bruce Reinstein, a partner from Kinetic 12. Bruce is a results-driven executive in the hospitality industry who is a partner at Kinetic 12, a strategic management consulting firm that specializes in the food service industry. Bruce's leadership experience in developing and growing multi-unit restaurant brands, concept operations, menu development, and supply chain strengthen Kinetic 12's knowledge and problem-solving consulting offerings. Kinetic 12 partner Tim Hand is also joining us today. Tim is a founding partner at Kinetic 12. He brings expertise in strategic planning, marketing, market research and category management, P&L management, innovation, and food service. For the last 10 years, Tim has consulted and led engagements with a variety of B2B and B2C clients to tackle a broad range of strategy, portfolio, innovation, and research challenges. Also, a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to all attendees following the event. There will also be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so please submit any questions you have via the Q&A window on your screen at any point during the webinar. And with that, I will hand it over to Wade to get us started.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure for me to be joining you today. In the time I have with you this morning, I want to discuss some of the topics that Technomic has identified as ones to watch in 2021. There are obviously many, but I'll be looking at 7 today. 7 that address everything from industry growth to areas of renewed focus or new focus for the operator community, as well as some things related to consumer dynamics that we have to pay attention to as we go further out onto the horizon. And I'll start with a subject that we're all quite focused on, which is the return of growth to our industry. I know it goes without saying that almost every single major food service segment was battered in 2020. Perhaps you could argue that limited service restaurants and something like senior living were the exceptions to that statement. But I want everybody to recognize as we get started here that the industry declined 26% nominally in 2020. That is incredibly significant. That said, we can expect 2021 to be a solid rebound year for the food service business. Depending on a number of factors, nominal growth will be somewhere between 17 and 23% for the year. Vaccination and treatment progress is at the root of the recovery, but this recovery is not going to be equitable for all segments. That's something we have to recognize. There are certain segments, including full service restaurants, things like lodging, a lot of the non-commercial segments of the industry that are not going to return to their 2019 sales levels until perhaps 2025 or beyond. There is some fundamental rebuilding of the business that has to occur and some major responses to the kind of new world, if you will, of the consumer that are going to be necessary. But recovery for 2021 and even further than that also faces some demographic challenges that we have to be aware of. One that maybe doesn't get enough discussion is what we might describe as the decline of the sweet spot of food service. Let me explain that a little bit. If you look at this slide, the dark black line indicates the degree of food service spending based on the age of U.S. households. And that shaded area, that gray area, represents the biggest spenders. So historically, it's been households headed by individuals between the ages of 35 and 54 that have been the biggest households in terms of their food service spending by a fairly significant amount. In the year 2000, that group represented 43% of our population. By 2019, that percentage had dropped to only 34% of the population, a 9-point drop. And by 2025, we're going to drop even further to 32%. So we have to be prepared to adapt to those demographics. Our core food service customers, that base of food service customers, the core heavy users, is shrinking. The population's getting older, and older Americans typically spend less on food service. So not only do we have to be planning around all of these major dynamics related to COVID going forward, but we also have to adjust to some of the trends that are affecting our business, including those demographic trends. Another one to watch. Innovation focus is shifting towards operational considerations. The good news is that we did a survey in November of last year with 600 food service operators. And one of the questions we asked them was, over the next few years, if they expected to be more interested in innovation, less interested, or equally interested in innovation. And what we found was that 38% said that they would be more interested, only 12% say less interested. So a 26-point gap. That's significant. But know that increasingly, we're talking about not just menu innovation. Operators are seeking more and more innovation that's going to help them with issues of efficiency and issues of profitability. So what innovations did they tell us they were looking for? When we did that November study, we gave them 20 possible innovations that they might be interested in. And we gauged what came in at the top. And what was number one? Number one was innovation around something versatile so they have fewer ingredients or less inventory back of house. Operators are trying to cut costs. They're trying to simplify operations. You'll hear us come back to that a few times during the course of the presentation today. And being more versatile with ingredients, when it simplifies back of house, it can mean fewer items for the chefs and cooks to have to master. It can cut waste. It can simplify ordering of ingredients and so forth. Also looking for something pre-portioned. This has the potential to solve multiple issues, including providing a more consistent experience for the guest. It might help with labor savings. It might also reduce some of the more unpleasant tasks or some of the things that employees indicate that they aren't as interested in doing. And in some cases, it might be something like trimming. These are the types of things that are going to drive innovation in the near term. Personal, environmental safety is here to stay. One of the biggest challenges facing the food service operator right now is how to instill confidence in consumers without going over the tipping point in terms of some of those safety considerations. Consumers want assurances. They desperately want assurances, but they also don't want to walk into a food service venue that looks like a crime scene, something that has police tape roping off large sections of the dining room. So there's a fine line between visible and well-communicated sanitation measures and something that heightens concerns of, should I be here right now? This is a critical balance that we have to pay an awful lot of attention to. Consumers are going to want that visible, hyper-vigilant safety in terms of the standards they're expecting, but we still have to make sure we have an enjoyable in-restaurant experience. But on that point, 89% of consumers say that having employees visibly cleaning or sanitizing at all times makes them feel safer. 77% say that a restaurant or food service institution's cleaning policies will impact their intent to visit. And 61% want to see more cleaning, more disinfecting done in front of me in a post-COVID world going forward. So safety measures will have to be visible. That'll be expected. And investments into physical changes inside the restaurant will also have to be evident. But those have to be reassuring changes, not intimidating changes. Sustainability, which was paused for the most part in 2020, is going to return full force. First off, we know that sustainability is a complex topic that potentially encompasses hundreds of issues. If I asked 100 people in food service right now what sustainability was, I'd probably get 100 different definitions. But in simple terms, I think most people agree that it has two components. Number one, it addresses core environmental, social, and economic needs. And number two, it doesn't do anything to compromise future generations in those areas. So in food service, we can really translate that into three buckets. We can call them the people, the product, and the planet buckets. Now, I do want to tell you that we just recently ran a survey about sustainability, and more than 4 out of every 5 food service operators indicated that they paused or halted at least one sustainability initiative in 2020 because of COVID. Now, that may have been done for financial reasons. There may have been resource considerations, or it may have just been simply a change in strategy. But what we found is that what's returning most in terms of sustainability in 2021 are those issues that would normally be classified within that people bucket. That's been a focus in 2020. It continues to be a focus when we talk about protecting our employees and our guests, when we talk about social justice consciousness that we saw a surge of in 2020, and investments into local communities. What I'm sharing on the screen right now is what operators said are their top sustainability initiatives this year. And that includes employee working conditions, employee diversity, local sourcing, equal rights, employee benefits. 4 of these 5 can directly be identified as people-based, certainly. And even local sourcing has an element to it that's investing in local workers and local businesses. Starbucks, which is pictured here on the slide, might be one of the best examples of many of these people-based sustainability topics. They've begun to tie executive compensation to diversity-related employment targets. They've committed to 30% of management positions, 40% of manufacturing jobs, and 40% of retail jobs being filled by people of color by 2025. Now, there's a lot of other actions that they're taking, but all of this is now being overseen by an Inclusion and Diversity Executive Council. Let's shift to what to watch from a consumer standpoint. Consumers are looking for simplified solutions for complex lives. It isn't just the operator that wants things simplified. Consumers have felt overwhelmed, they've felt stressed, they've felt isolated for the better part of the past year, and they're asking to have more and more complexities removed from their lives. So they're trying to address things like their stress levels and their health concerns and balancing the different elements of their life right now. Childcare, homeschooling, perhaps they're facing unemployment for the first time, or they have financial obligations they can't meet. But they do want more of life's simple pleasures, and they want to be able to enjoy those things. So 59% of consumers are looking to simplify their life going forward. And that's translated to food service. 53% of consumers like the way that restaurants have simplified their operations and want to see those changes permanently. And operators are just fine with that. As a result of what the consumer is asking for, 63% of operators plan to simplify their operations in the coming year. They'll streamline menus, they'll simplify payment methods, they'll make ordering easier, and so on. While we also see that consumer lifestyles will remain disrupted. We know that's happening. We believe it's going to continue. Work, school, childcare, worshiping, communicating with friends and family, it's all muddled. And while muddling of work and family and social is leading to complexity for the consumers, it's also complicating things for the operator, as we're finding that the lines between food away from home and food at home are becoming more and more blurred. But specifically on the front of the consumer, 39%, so essentially 2 in 5 consumers say, my roles and responsibilities often clash and conflict throughout the day. 35% have challenges compartmentalizing all of the different roles they're filling on a daily basis. And 31% have challenges creating boundaries to help manage their daily roles and responsibilities. And we need to think about that consumer as an industry. We need to explore these changes that people are experiencing in their daily roles and routines. And we need to follow that evolution and how it's leading to shifts in food service usage based on a new set of drivers and a new set of need states. the same consumer could very well have twice as many need states going forward as what they had pre-pandemic. And those can vary significantly based on occasion, day part, routine, mood, and many other new need state considerations. And connection elements with restaurants are changing. Restoring connections to food service is going to be a real challenge. Food service for the past 10 to 12 months has been mostly carry out, delivery, and drive-through. So consumers have had their basic food needs met, but they aren't getting that full experience that food service historically brings. And one of the things that we've also recognized is that the pandemic has exposed even more generational differences than perhaps we thought existed. Different age groups want different things out of food service, both now and in the future. Let's look at some of the differences and the unique connection needs. On the left-hand side, you'll see some things that have differentiated one consumer from another based on age, all the way up to and including part of 2020. Then we had a bit of this break. And on the right-hand side, we talk about some of the things that are likely to be differences between generations going forward. Gen Z, our youngest adult generation, is looking for more things related to social responsibility. They've got a high level of awareness, they've got a high level of concern, and they want to make sure that the restaurants they believe in and frequent are demonstrating some of those same social responsibility efforts. They want more digital storytelling. This is the online generation. They get their messages online, they communicate online, and they want to hear content shared by themselves and the industry through these means. Millennials want more personalization. They want to know that a restaurant knows them, perhaps what their ordering behavior looks like, knows consumers like them, and has tailored their operation towards the millennial. And they're looking for a reinvented dine-in experience that focuses around good, clean fun. And we'll say clean essentially means two different things here. Clean, yes, in terms of safety. Clean also in terms of maybe wholesome. This is a generation that has young families and is now exposing their children to food service or re-expose them. And it's going to shape the behavior of that younger generation, as this is the time in food service that they'll most remember growing up. Gen X wants to focus on craveability. Oftentimes that's around beverage and appetizer and shareables. They're okay with moving forward in a contactless way, but they want to make sure that there's always an element of interaction with the restaurant staff. And boomers are going to be looking more and more for value and loyalty programs and making sure that they have that long-standing connection to the restaurants they frequent. This is all emerging at a time where operators are reinventing themselves, and it's going to be a significant challenge for the industry to address all of these disparate needs of generations all under the same roof. How do you make sure that you're addressing what Gen Z wants in terms of social responsibility and digital with what boomers are going to want in terms of loyalty programs and interaction? That's a big challenge and will continue going forward. Finally, the last thing I want to share with you is just a bit of an update on where Technomic sees the industry right now. I know many of you have probably seen this slide from us, which is essentially the 4S process of recovery from the pandemic. Right now, we believe we are still in what we'll call the start phase. Survival was containment and minimizing damage to the industry. We've moved into a start phase, which is essentially a slow return to somewhat normal operations. The good news is that we believe that by the third quarter of 2021, a majority of operators will be in what we call the strengthen phase. So they'll have moved into a time when we have more of a total lifting of physical distancing measures, and operators are likely to be serving most customers again in some dine-in capacity. So some good news there in terms of the next several months as we fully expect to see the industry moving along this timeline and moving into a better, stronger period of growth. I'm going to throw it back to DMA at this point.
Okay, looks like looks like we're just going to move on to the next presenter. Tim, can you take it from here?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Tim from Kinetic 12 here with Bruce, my partner from Kinetic 12, and we're going to talk about some trends from the restaurant side of the business. So, Bruce, let me pass it over to you to kick us off.
All right, thanks, Tim. So Kinetic 12 has been focusing on the restaurant of the future now since March. So it's been almost a year, and we've just completed our 6th installment of that, which came out today. And we're really, truly continuing to be in the midst of significant change. Tim and I will take a look today at where we stand as an industry and what is the status of our predictions, insights, and implications. All of us continue to modify our business models, and where will we be in this post-crisis world? What we truly believe is that the old normal will be back. We're going to be in a new normal, which we're still trying to figure out. So how we communicate and collaborate and how we interact together continues to be impacted. So the restaurant of the future is evolving. And what we're going to talk to you today is really about the 8 drivers of change that we see, and then the food service DNAs that won't change.
Yeah, so as Wade said, I mean, we're in unprecedented times. Industry was down 26% last year, and there's a phrase that goes, crisis is the true catalyst of change. And if that is true, then we can expect to see some permanent changes. And what's interesting about looking at these trends and examining them is trying to determine which ones will actually stick, right? What's going to actually stick. So as we look through these, it'll be interesting for all of us to consider what's going to stick. And I think one of the biggest changes we've seen is how much more off-premise business. And will it increase from 40 to 45 or to 50 when the dust settles? And what's kind of the longer term trickle down impact of that on all of us and how we do business? So we've structured this look as 8 drivers of change that we're seeing in restaurants, and then also the 4 things that are not going to change that we call kind of the DNAs, those kind of underlying consumer expectations that will continue to exist and really going to drive much of what restaurants do. And so when I pass it back to Bruce, he's going to look at the first 8.
All right. Thanks, Tim. So, it was back in April that we worked on a schematic drawing to try to figure out exactly what would the restaurant of the future look like? How would we incorporate all the different things that were changing, especially where consumers were not able to eat inside? Off-premise became something that was new and different. And we actually altered the schematic over a period of time. And as we all know, many footprints of many brands have changed accordingly. So taking a look at these 8 drivers of change, the first one really focuses in on off-premise and new streams of revenue. Off-premise has become universal, and finding revenue throughout the day in new and innovative ways is providing positive results. We figured out that anything is possible, but we have to be able to do is execute. It's interesting that fringe day parts, we always talked about breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but doing business throughout the day has become crucial, and we call it fringe day parts. And there are also many types of off-premise, and we've gone from obviously major curbside business to drive-through, but also a major new business called subscription business that we've seen. A good example of some of the concepts that have made changes. I mean, Del Taco has gone through with drive-through and curbside programs, and they're driving more traffic. It's working for them. Shake Shack, for the longest time, avoided driving revenue through traditional QSR methods, but they're doing it. They're doing curbside. They've added drive-throughs. So things are changing, and they're changing at a rapid pace. Taking a look at menu simplification, we've spent a lot of time discussing it. Bloated menus have now become much more simplified. SKU reduction has become critical, and not only SKU reduction, but if we're adding SKUs or ingredients, we're making sure they have multiple uses. In general, if you can't execute it, don't sell it. And that goes for products that may be fine for in-house dining, just simply may not work from an off-premise standpoint. Trying to understand also what comfort food is a major issue. If a product is a popular product, you want to try to find a way to sell it. And what we show here is that there's no reason that soup can't be a product that actually you can drink. It could be a broth soup. It could be a pureed soup. It could be actually something that does very well for off-premise. The other picture that we're showing here is a chicken pot pie that an operator went to a supplier and said, I need a handheld version because I want to sell this product off-premise. So there are ways of moving forward with products. And we can see that companies as large as McDonald's have made changes. They had gone through the process of adding breakfast all day, and they had to make some decisions. And this type of menu was pushed back by the franchisees, and they went to a much smaller, more permanent menu. A company like Logan's Roadhouse in the casual dining segment, they definitely pared their menu down to simplify, to make it easier, to eliminate staff, to make themselves more productive. And by streamlining, they've been able to survive and be able to drive some new revenue that they hadn't had in the past. We've all seen smaller footprints and flexible kitchens and seating. Smaller footprints result in many things, but it provides the opportunity for seasonal pop-up spaces, a lot of versatility to do business throughout the year and in many formats. We believe kitchens will need to be very flexible in the restaurant of the future. And we're seeing that with ghost kitchens. No reason that casual dining or fine dining restaurants that have underutilized kitchens can't put them to use. And they've done that by creating ghost kitchens within there. The same holds true of seating and service flexibility. They're evolving. You need to be able to adapt to weather and guest behaviors. But in general, you have to do business. And the feeling is if you're not flexible, be prepared for a difficult and costly change in the future. And from a manufacturer and distributor strategic standpoint, you really have to know the operator brand from the eyes of the consumer and operator. What is their strategy, and how can you help them execute more efficiently? A good example of Noodles & Company. Noodles & Company has done extremely well through the COVID period. And they're convinced that a smaller footprint will maintain sales and make them more efficient. And they just a good example of somebody who's done extremely well. Cross-functional staff and greater productivity is the next area. Where we were dealing with specialized labor, we've now moved to more cross-functional staff. Imagine a restaurant with dine-in food delivery to the table, curbside pickup, walk-up takeout, drive-through, and curbside delivery, and having the same person trained to handle all of these. That's part of the restaurant of the future. Avoiding the specialized approach and putting everybody to work so that they can handle all capacities within the restaurant. Food hygiene and safety and sanitation practices, that's not going away. I mean, that's part of the future. It's part of who we are as really as an industry. So safety first will continue to be on consumers' mind. And Wade touched on it. People want to see food hygiene and safety in practice. They don't want to just hear a story that it's going on. One of the concerns that we had was as restaurants started to get busier during the summer, they were doing more in-house business, they started to take their eye a little bit off of safety. And the consumer noticed, and they started to lose business. So safety and sanitation is going to be critical moving forward. The emergence of technology in a no-touch world. Technology innovations are moving at a rapid pace. Much of it has been about taking the complexity out of the restaurant business. So who would have thought that a basic QR code could eliminate a menu, or that artificial intelligence and geofencing could change our lives so quickly? But we all have embraced technology and the ability to order and pay, get what we want when we want it. We don't believe that's going away. It's just going to be modified. Obviously, we've seen some of the larger companies like Burger King, they've made adjustments. They've embraced a smaller footprint and the ability to improve the performance that they have. White Castle, providing their regular guests with a better experience using voice and facial recognition. So there are a lot of ways to do it, but in the end, it's consumer behaviors and getting them comfortable with the changes that we're going through. Next would be community adoption of consumer behaviors and differentiations. The consumer is part of the decision making as far as where the restaurant operations are going to be going. As consumers stay close to home, community has become incredibly important. Operators are supporting local causes, but also offering up creative approaches to service their customers. And differentiation will have a major effect on consumer frequency and consistency of all the aspects of the guest experience being crucial. One of the pictures I'm showing here is a picture of a bowl of pesto with some fresh focaccia bread. In the end, if you're going to actually provide quality product to the consumer, you're going to have to be consistent. It's not just about the entree, it's everything else that you're providing with it. The expectations are going to be much tougher than they've ever been before. Tim, did you want to talk about the evolution of strategic partner relationships?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So these are all three best practices that we've worked on at Kinetic 12 the last few years. And the idea of how operators are connecting with their distributor partners and with their supplier partners is changing. The first one is the operator collaboration model is a segmentation model. You know, not all relationships are created equal. An operator may have 100 suppliers, but they can only go deep with their top 5 or 10 or 15. Collaborative innovation is getting at the idea of how you work together on innovation. And so what we've seen is a move over the last 2 decades of working more closely with suppliers. And even over the last year with COVID, I think people are being more choiceful in who they work with and are valuing those top distributor and operator relationships differently. So that concludes the 8. The last 4 quickly are kind of those things that aren't going to change, those consumer expectations. And, you know, when we wrote the first 2 Restaurant of the Future articles, we were presenting at a webinar and someone had come back and said, I understand what is going to change, but what you haven't talked about is what's not going to change. And I said, well, you know, that's not what the article was about. And after I got over my defensiveness, we thought, well, that would be a good idea to kind of look at these 4 things that aren't going to change. So the first one is this idea of value. Clearly, these are 4 things that the consumer, you know, from the dawn of time of restaurants until long after we're gone, these are going to be things that consumers are after, and clearly operators need to keep this in mind, and all of us in the channel need to keep in mind. So the desire for value. The challenge with this one is that consumers define value differently. Is it the taste of the great hamburger? Is it the price value equation I get from a deal? Or is it the experience? And what makes it even more challenging is that a person's value expectation will change, right? I want convenience for breakfast at Dunkin'. I want taste for lunch, and I want experience for dinner. Very complicated. So the next three are all kind of somewhat related to this. Clearly there's a crossover, but the second DNA is this idea of experiencing great service. And we have physiological needs, like I have coffee to wake me up, versus the experiential needs. I go through the Dunkin' in the morning because driving through the drive-through, talking for 10 seconds, 5 seconds to the person, feeling the cup in my hand, smelling it, that helps. That's the kind of the catalyst that gets me to work. There's some other points on here you can look down through, but there's many aspects of experience and service that are crucial, that are expected, that can be differentiators. And what we've learned clearly in the last 10 months, that technology and how an app works can be a defining experience as to whether they choose that restaurant. The third DNA is the idea of quality and consistency. We don't have to go into a long lecture of this, and we all get it, but this is not going away. People go to a restaurant because they expect a certain thing. That's consistency, and clearly a fundamental driver of the idea of brands. And even many other elements within the idea of consistency. The last one is sustainability. It's taken a little bit of a back seat over the last year, but there's been a 15-year trend, 20, 25-year trend towards sustainability. We know the three dimensions of sustainability. What we see is food hygiene. We are proposing may become a fourth dimension, which is kind of what happens to the food after it starts to be processed down the channel and through the restaurant, and how does that impact our bodies. So food hygiene is an interesting new phrase that's kind of entered our lexicon that we kind of see maybe being folded into this expectation of sustainability. So last page is a recap of the 8 drivers of change we see as a result of the forces of the pandemic, the 4 underlying DNAs that will continue to be crucial to being successful and running a restaurant. And Bruce, final thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention too, we weren't able to, timing-wise, talk a lot about the Restaurant of the Future 6.0, which is focused strictly on differentiation. And we really believe that the idea of being different is going to be critical to the future of our industry, because different is better than better. So this just came out today in QSR, and Tim and I are going to ask Charlie to make sure that everybody attending today, he makes that available to them, and we hope you're able to enjoy it.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bruce. Thank you so much, Tim. And thank you so much, Wade, for sharing all of these insights today. Everybody who is a registered attendee will get a series of links from us afterwards. You'll be able to download the presentations. You'll have access to the link Bruce just mentioned. And now we've got an opportunity for a little Q&A. So if you have questions for any of the 3 of these guys, please put them in the Q&A tab, and we will make sure we get to those in timely order. While you're thinking about that, I've got just a couple of more specific questions for each of the presenters. So Wade, you'd mentioned, obviously we know 2020 was bad, and you gave us some statistics around that. Can you give us a little bit more context around just how bad it was from a sales perspective and what we're up against in terms of a rebound?
Yeah, it's a good question, and from a historical standpoint, what I can tell you is that we have had in this country in the last 50 years, there have been 4 economic recessions. And in 3 of those 4 recessions, food service actually grew. It was only in the most recent of 2008, 2009, 2010, that housing bubble recession, where the industry saw any declines. And in hindsight, those were only by a couple of points. So we compare that to the fact, as I mentioned earlier, we're down 26% nominally in 2020. This is a different animal. You know, we can't combat mandated closures. We can't combat a pandemic very easily. And so what that's led to is some segments have been down 50, 60% or more compared to 2019. We've got approximately 80,000 restaurants closed permanently just in 2020. So no matter how you look at it compared to the past, this has been severe. And we've got a lot to deal with.
Yeah, thank you so much for the added perspective there. You know, we've talked about sustainable a little bit. I think both presentations dealt with it. There's a question from Kimberly in terms of local versus sustainable versus socially responsible. What do we think carries the most weight for consumer or operator purchasing decisions? Wade, I'll ask that of you first, and then maybe Bruce or Tim, if you could follow up on that.
Sure.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at this. You know, what carries the most weight today might be a little bit different than what carries more weight a year from now or 2 years from now. Sometimes what we find when we look at consumers and sustainability or social responsibility is consumers tend to focus on what they understand, what is shaping their lives at the moment. So there was a time where consumers would say, well, I believe, you know, restaurants should focus on energy efficiency. I understand in my own household of using more sustainable light bulbs, or I can buy kitchen equipment that has energy savings to it. So that was an understood point. What we can think about with where we are right now is more of that social aspect, the social responsibility, with more and more people becoming aware, enlightened, involved, educated. We see more book clubs popping up around social responsibility and so forth. So at a time when the consumer is dedicating so much more of their time and attention to social responsibility and many different types of causes, that naturally translates to them attaching that to the food service industry and saying, we expect more of restaurants because of what we're going through as a society and because of what I'm paying particular attention to right now.
That makes a ton of sense, Wade. Bruce or Tim?
Yeah, Charlie, I just wanted to add just the point about trust. And, you know, one of the things that consumers right now are facing is they want to be able to trust the restaurants that they go to. So it's a lot more now than where did my food come from in terms of the raw product. They're very, very interested in where did the product come from the kitchen to their home. So there's going to be a lot more of product that people may take out that may actually say prepared by Jim. They want to know that. They want to feel comfortable.
It's a great point about trust, and it's a little bit of a segue into another one of the listener questions from John. Not talking about necessarily so source of food for trust, but with more awareness of how much information is being harvested from cell phone locations. Any pushback around geofence-based apps or other types of sort of digital, pushing into folks' lives? I don't know, Bruce or Tim, do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, well, I think we've heard a lot of some operators talk about geofencing, and I mean, that's a little bit more of a sophisticated kind of layering on of technology that I don't know how many operators are quite there yet. But I think, it's kind of how concerned are we with the whole Big Brother thing? And I think as more people get comfortable with technology, young people are totally immersed in it. It's not like they have their phones screwed to their heads and they're on apps all day long. And we know that we're being tracked. You say a word and the next day it pops up in your Google search And you go, how do they know that? So I think our barriers to Big Brother may be coming down. So we'll see. I mean, you have to shine out the crystal ball and look forward as to how big of a concern that will be. But I don't. Bruce, Wade, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, look, all of us right now, somebody's listening to us, and but I think geofencing is important. You hate to have the feeling that somebody knows exactly what you're doing, but when it comes to placing your order online and paying for it online, you surely would like to be able to show up at the restaurant and your product is ready for you. So that's kind of the new world of convenience, and I just think it's going to be part of our lives. I think it already is.
Yeah, no, that's fair, and the the generational differences there are interesting too in terms of where tech fits. One of the questions that's come in is around the notion that we might be overthinking or giving too much credit to the various generations and what they want. I don't know, Wade. You talked a little bit about some of the generational influences in the future of food service. Do you want to field that one?
Yeah, I think what happens sometimes is we see patterns repeat themselves. So, when we think about starting to profile Gen Z, and a lot of times you have Gen Z push back and say, I'm unique, I'm different from everyone else in my generation, but what we try to talk about are patterns. We saw the same thing with millennials. Millennials said, I'm unique, I'm different, don't try to lump me in with the rest of my generation or other generations. Yet we could learn a lot by studying their collective behaviors and attitudes and those sorts of things. And they really crystallize some ideas for us. So on one hand, I understand why some people would say maybe we're focusing too much on certain generations, particularly generations that maybe don't have the spending power right now, but they'll get there. And by watching their evolution, we learn a lot, and we learn how to address their needs better as they age and as they change lifestyles and become families and whatnot. So we have to track them. We have to understand what they're all about.
No, I totally agree with that, and I'm just always thankful that very few people address, the 19 or 20 of us in the Gen X category. We seem to be happily absent from a lot of those calculations. We've got a question kind of veering a little bit into the operations side around what impact do we see the industry on the industry for the $15 minimum wage. And the impact of that being tipped or non-tipped. I don't know, Bruce, as a former operator, is that something you'd want to weigh in on?
Yeah, one of the major changes, and I talked a little bit about it, is the operator will have a team of employees who are much more multifaceted. The other thing about the so-called server, many brands already have gotten to the point where the consumer is going in and actually ordering, and really the focus is strictly on the server actually delivering the food to the table. So, tipping, the whole idea of tipping may change as well. So there's really an evolution involved in staffing, because productivity and efficiency really is probably the number one driver right now for operators. They're trying to become much better at that, and which means they can run their business with less staff. So even if they're getting paid $15 an hour, they will have less labor actually involved in the operation.
Now, thanks tons for that perspective. That makes a lot of sense. Shifting gears a little bit, I want to make sure a large chunk of this audience is associated with distribution and looks to DMA for or DMA content for distribution related and chain related questions. Any thoughts on the ownership shifts within chains, either from private to public or public to private? That type of thing. I don't Wade, do you have a perspective on that from your side of the business?
Yeah, I think it's going to continue to evolve. There is a lot of money on the sidelines right now. We anticipate that private equity getting more and more involved. So we've seen some of that happen over the last 6 months or so, the shifting ownership structures. But I think for me anyway, it's a little bit of remains to be seen. But we can expect, given private equity's public statements about the fact that they want to get more involved in food service, they see the growth potential as strong as ever for many leading chains. I think we can expect activity there.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think, if we've existed in a kind of 50-50 share of stomach retail grocery for a couple of decades, it's dropped to whatever it's dropped to, 60-40, 53, or 57-43. That's going to come back, in my opinion. And so, we're in a crisis right now. It's a perfect time to come in and invest. And based on the activity we've seen the last 20 years from private equity firms, I would say it's a bit of a feeding frenzy right now. And because the industry is going to come back. So I think we'll see more of a shift towards that.
Yeah, that's a great segue, Tim, too. We had another question come in around supermarket food service footprints. How do you think that evolves within that shift that you're talking about, or that evolution you mentioned?
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot of talk in the last 10 years about omni-channel and the idea that consumers don't really care how we define the industry, right? The partitions we create between all these channels are meaningless to a consumer. And so we need to start adopting or looking at it through the consumer's lens, which I know we are all doing. So we've seen the explosion of grocery food service. I think they've gotten even so much better at it in the last few years. And, I think even the changes we're seeing in segments with ghost units, and I think that we're in the midst of a revolution on how channels are defined and even how segments in our industry are defined. So we have to be careful as managers, all of us, that we don't push our kind of preconceived structure and manage through that lens, because sometimes it's hard to see a 30-year evolution when you're looking at one point in time.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that one.
Yeah, please do.
One thing that we've seen with respect to supermarket food service in the last year is, and this ties back to our conversation, I think we all touched on it, which was safety and sanitation. And something that consumers have always had some degree of concern with are some of the sanitation aspects of that salad bar, that hot bar, and so forth. It's never been at the top of the list of where they feel most comfortable in terms of self-serve. I mean, condiment stations, beverage stations, and so forth resonate pretty well with the consumer in terms of, is this safe? Is this sanitary? Salad bars, hot bars, soup stations, and so forth have always been kind of middling for consumers in that area. And we've seen a significant decline since the pandemic started. And we've got a lot of consumers who are saying, I wasn't comfortable before, perhaps. Now that I've seen no changes in the size of the plexiglass, no changes in access to tongs and spoons, not a lot of change in terms of the visibility of cleaning around those stations, we've seen consumers get more and more concerned about those locations within the store. So I think there's going to be some fundamental changes. Perhaps we'll see more grab and go. We'll see more meal kits. We'll see some different things that are sitting side by side with some of the long-standing supermarket food service programs. But there will be some changes, particularly on the self-serve side.
Yeah, it's a great point. And one of the things that, last month, Carrie Jaros, the CEO at Gojo Purell brand, said to us was, that Q1 was the opportunity for operators to really invest heavily so that they were prepared when the next 3 S's come forward in the recovery. What's the one thing around sanitation that operators in any channel or segment are going to need to do Either Wade from your perspective or Bruce from yours. Let's hear from Wade first. What's the one thing that, from a sanitation or safety perspective, that everybody's going to have to do immediately?
Well, I don't think it's that complex. I think number one is that visibility aspect, being very overt about what you're doing. The consumer has said that we feel safer when we see certain activities going on. So I think that's certainly part of it. I think there's also a communication piece that's important. We don't want to scare the consumer in terms of identifying things that might be perceived as really aggressive about a cleaning program. But I think as operators are investing, they benefit from communicating that to the customer. The guest benefits from hearing about what they're doing, whether that's increased disinfecting rather than simple cleaning, whether that's investments in technology that perhaps are making a difference in terms of sanitizing, whether that's in the HVAC systems or whatnot. Communication, I think, is going to be key for the operator to make sure that the consumer is comfortable with what they're doing.
Yeah,
Bruce?
I agree with that. I wanted to add one more thing, and it's true, the visibility is critical. The story that the operator tells is critical. And then the whole idea that if you don't have air purification within your restaurants, you have issues as well. And I believe that is going to be, not only is it going to need to be done, but I think it's going to be required as restaurants continue to be built. So that's the only add-on that I had.
Yeah, that's an excellent.
One other point, Charlie, if I could. I think we're depending how some of these safety and sanitation issues play out. The one thing that this could lead to is a separation between the independent and chains, potentially. If the consumer is demanding more from a sanitation standpoint, demanding that an operator has some of these more advanced programs, including technology, maybe including having people at the front door taking temperatures, which obviously requires more labor. There's a lot of things that could happen, which if the consumer says, these are my safety demands, and the independent doesn't feel as if they have the resources to accommodate that, whereas the national accounts and the regional accounts perhaps maybe have the resources to fund those changes, it could put us in a very different position in terms of consumer perception of who is responding to their needs and who may have more difficulty doing so.
That's excellent. Well, we've just got a couple of minutes left here. I'd like to take the time just to say thank you to Wade and Technomic and to Bruce and Tim and Kinetic 12. Fantastic panel. Excellent questions from the audience. So thank you for your engagement. What I would offer is we're going to continue to do these monthly virtual events. February's will be announced this week. We've got great topics and great high-level C-suite speakers for you coming up the third week in February. If you'd like to be notified of these, head over to dmadelivers.com. It's really easy to drop your email in there and be alerted to the upcoming events. Thank you again, everybody, for participating and joining us today. And we'll see you next month.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Charlie.